Hey everyone, Chaps here, and today is part 3 of our assembly of the Prusa Mk4 Kit. So far we've assembled the frame and the X-axis, so today we move on to the Z-axis. As usual, I've got timestamps down below if you want to skip around. I've also got links to the other parts of the series and a longer video showing the full process down there. Also, you'll find some links to the online assembly manual as well. With the X-axis all assembled, let's go ahead and start grabbing some parts for the Z-axis. We're going to start with the bottom left and right brackets. Using a few screws, we'll screw them into place, and there's a little lip on the side to help ensure that they fit into the right spot and to make sure that they're on the right side. Now we can get out the Z motors and the attached screw drives. We'll also need to add some rubber pads at this time. There's a few plastic nuts in this box as well, and they just recommend putting them aside so that you don't lose them. The motors get mounted to the underside of the mounting brackets. The longer cable should be on the side opposite of the buddy board. And I guess I'll mention that the rubber pads are placed over the motor before we screw them down. At this point we can tighten them most of the way, but we need to leave a little slack for some of the next steps. First though, we'll feed the wires into place, under the frame, and up to the buddy box slots. Now those trapezoidal nuts come into play, along with 2 more metal rods. This time we use the 2 shortest, which are also the largest in diameter. We'll go ahead and push them down into place. And there's even a little viewport in the motor mounts to help you make sure that they're pushed in all the way. From here, get the X-axis assembly and slide it down over the rods. The plastic X-axis holder now comes into play, and it's used to hold the assembly up near the top of the printer. With this being held up here, we can now see how the threaded rods stick up through the X-axis brackets. It's up near the top, so any small changes in angle cause a large amount of movement. This gives us the opportunity to tighten the Z-motor screws. We want to get them nice and tight, but we may need to back off slightly on some of them in order to ensure that the screw is centered in this hole. We can now move on to screwing in the trapezoidal nuts. They screw onto the threaded rods and down into the holes on the X-axis assembly. Tightening the screws down on these nuts now lock the Z-axis height to the X-axis assembly. So really, we can remove the X holder if we want. I mean, I didn't. I probably should have, but I waited until a little bit later. Up next, we have a couple end caps that go over the Z-rods. These go over the top and screw into the frame. I had a bunch of trouble with one of these, so I put a screw in from the back to ensure that the frame was threaded out nicely. And yeah, sorry about some of the camera angles. I should have used a wide angle option on the phone, but again, assembly was priority, not recording. With this assembly all in place, it's time to hook up some of the controls for the X-axis. We'll need to go to the so-called LoveBoard, and also this large extruder cable. The cable gets passed through the axis and up into a channel in the carriage. We then plug it into the LoveBoard, and then we push the LoveBoard down to its slot on the carriage. From there it gets screwed into place, and I do a bit of cable management. Okay, so now we want to set up some parts so that the cables can feed from the LoveBoard down to the buddy box. We start with a large screw going through this cable holder. Next we grab the nylon strand and this back cover. We'll go ahead and place one of the rubber pads onto this back cover, which will prevent the bearings from rotating. And now the nylon gets pushed through the little hole to hold it in place. After ensuring that no wires are pinched, the back cover can be screwed on and that bearing can be held into place. I didn't quite have one of the inserted nuts on the carriage pulled in all the way, so my screw didn't quite reach. Luckily, I could just use one of the longer ones to pull it tight, and then go back with the correct screw. From here, it's a part that I always hate for some reason, and that's using the cable sleeve. We'll use the largest of the 3 cable sleeves and wrap this bundle of cables up. After getting it started, this cover gets placed on and zip tied down. Spoiler alert, these zip ties gave me some trouble in the future. Make sure they're tight and make sure they're rotated properly. So from here, we just finish wrapping up the sleeve, and after grabbing a few other parts here, it's time to wrap up the X motor cable, which is much shorter and easier. Now it's time to move on to this cable holder that brings the newly sleeved cables together. We'll push a few nuts in them, and then we'll use the nylon to lock the larger bundle into place. Next, the smaller bundle gets passed over top and placed in its spot. From here we can screw down the top of the cable holder. This clamps down on the sleeves and keeps everything in place. A zip tie is then used to clamp down further on one of the extensions, and honestly I'm not entirely sure why that was needed. But now we can slot this into the buddy box and tighten it down. The cables are left unattached for now, and with that, the Z-axis, and I guess the X-axis wiring, are completed. That took another hour and 45 minutes, bringing us to a total of 5 hours and 10 minutes so far on the build. With this wrapped up, it's time for another short break, and in the next video we're going to take a look at the extruder assembly, which is one of the largest changes from the previous Mark III. As always, the links to the other videos are down below. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a comment or hit me up on Twitter. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing and liking, and thanks for watching everyone. I'll catch you in the next one.